Good morning, friends. When we left off last time on the power of un, Gib had unned so many minutes that he ended up back on the morning of the accident, back in school in science class with Rainey. And he was trying to decide if making little changes to keep Rainey, in this case, happier and not mad at him, would result in too big of changes later on. So I'm going to pick up where we left off. I knew what was coming. We were about to have a fight, and Rainey would end up pouring the whole box of salt in my lap. Then I thought if I changed one thing just a little bit, I might be able to avoid the anger and frustration of being called selfish in front of everybody and having to clean up the salty mess from under the table. Would that be so bad? Part of me said yes, it would be bad, possibly worse than bad, immoral. What if there was some kind of master plan and I messed it all up? Did I have the right to do something that might change the future of everybody else in the world? I'd be doing it entirely to make my own life easier, and I wasn't asking anybody else what they wanted. It didn't feel right. But a different part of me, the most persuasive part as it turned out, thought it was a great idea not to relive this particularly embarrassing scene. So what if Rainey felt a little kinder toward me? I couldn't see how that would change anything major in the long run, not in a bad way at least. After all, wasn't this exactly the kind of thing the honor was meant for? If I wasn't supposed to change anything, why had the old man given me the honor in the first place? So when the time came for me to say, "Come on, if it gets messy, I'll clean it up," I said something else instead. "Okay, no big deal. Put the salt on whatever way you want." Rainey smiled and said, "Okay." After that, everything was spookily different for a while, and I began to wonder if I'd made a gigantic mistake. True, Rainey and I didn't fight, but that also meant we did things we hadn't done before. Instead of crawling around under the table with the whisk broom and the dustpan, we actually finished our experiment and wrote up the results in our notebooks. And those results were boring, just as I'd originally feared. There wasn't enough salt to draw the water out, so nothing much happened. Toward the end of the period, things started to get familiar again. The bell rang, we picked up our backpacks and headed down the hall to other classes. I met up with Ash, who had no idea the honor existed. We talked about our carnival plans and tried to make each other bump into walls as we walked to the gym. Things went exactly as they had before. I grinned and felt muscles in my arms and shoulders loosen that I hadn't even realized were tight. I'd used the power of un to rescue myself from one of the worst parts of the day. And still I was in a chain of known events and everything was going along just fine. Maybe time was like a pool of water. When you disturb it, ripples go out from the place you touch, stronger in the center but getting fainter and fainter, till finally you can't see them anymore. I hoped I was right, but I couldn't be sure. So I made a pact with myself not to change things carelessly. Making changes felt bad, like cheating. I also didn't want to get lost and find myself in a future even worse than the one I knew was coming. It seems strange to think such a thing, because after all, what could be worse than Roxy getting hit by a truck? But I could imagine worse possibilities. Both of us getting hit by a truck, or Mom and Dad getting hit by a truck, or an earthquake, or our house burning down with all of us in it. The trouble is, as the hours passed and things continued to happen just as I remembered, I got kind of overconfident. All those awful scenarios faded into the background until they seemed so overblown and unlikely that I stopped worrying about them. Probably I'd already done a bunch of stuff differently without even realizing it. And so far there were no problems at all. How much could it hurt if I changed a few tiny things on purpose? When I went through the lunch line, I asked for macaroni and cheese because I remembered that the potatoes and gravy had tasted putrid. It didn't make one speck of difference that I could see, except that I liked my lunch better. Feeling pleased with myself, I gave in to temptation and made another small change later on the playground. I stepped out of the way instead of getting whacked in the stomach by a stray dodgeball. Ash said, "Whoa, that was great. How'd you see it coming?" I grinned and I said, "I don't know, instinct, I guess." Then things started to get weird. Instead of bouncing off my middle and scuttling back toward the kid who threw it, the dodgeball sped toward an open gate. "Hey, catch that ball!" the kid yelled. "Sure thing," Ash called, and he ran after it. For one awful moment, I was sure he would chase that ball into the street and run in front of a truck. But it didn't happen that way. He caught the ball before it got through the gate and threw it back to the players. Still, the scare left me struggling to keep that macaroni and cheese in my stomach where it belonged. I tried to get things back on track and insisted we go to the computer lab, even though Ash wanted to stop for a drink of water on the way. The awful possibilities sprang into clear focus again. Who could say what might happen if he stopped for that drink? After a few minutes, events began to happen the way I expected, and I could breathe normally again. But I renewed my vow not to change anything else. Minute followed minute until the end of the day finally arrived, and it was time for Miss Shripnell's math class once more. Hopefully you remember what happened in this class. Ash and I passed notes to each other instead of doing our decimals worksheets, and when I opened my binder for more paper, the soda straw fell out. I gritted my teeth and picked it up, knowing exactly how uncomfortable the next few moments would be. I even started to make the fateful spitball. Then I thought, this is going to be horrible. Maybe it's worth it to risk another change. Maybe if I don't shoot this spitball, Rainey won't get into trouble. Then she won't have any reason to get mad at me. She'll come and babysit instead of pretending to be sick, and Roxy will never get near the carnival or the bumper of that truck. Maybe this is the one small mistake that, if avoided, will make the big things right again. Maybe I'm supposed to change this. But am I brave enough to try it? If the spitball incident never happens, everything might go differently. Suppose the new time path I make creates some of those awful situations I've imagined. There I might be, and Roxy too, at fate's mercy again, maybe without the honor or any hope of ever getting it. I thought it all through at light speed while I held the soda straw in one hand and the spitball in the other. I wanted to do the best thing this time. I should never have shot that dumb spitball. It felt right to avoid it now. A second passed, then two. I lay the straw down and dropped the spitball on the floor. Halfway through a smile of relief, I glanced over at Rainey. The smile froze on my face like a lopsided popsicle. Rainey had just shot her own spitball, only she didn't aim it at me this time. I honestly think she was trying for the blackboard or one of the lights. Who knows what made her do it? She wasn't angry at me now. Maybe she was just in the mood for a little excitement. Even a girl like Rainey might get bored in math class on a too warm Friday afternoon. But she hadn't had much practice with spitballs or with sneakiness. The wet wad hit Miss Shripnell in the center of the forehead, right where mine had hit her before. Rainey sat with her mouth half open and the straw in her hand, a sitting duck. Old Shrapnel's face went through its series of expressions. It was like watching the Wheel of Fortune, knowing it would land on Fury. "Lorraine Frogner!" she roared. I don't remember thinking much about what I did next. I'd decided I was going to change this scene, and I could see that nothing would end up being very different unless I took further action. This, more than anything else, convinced me of the importance of the moment. Something big was fighting me, trying to keep things the way they were. I felt as if I were pushing my way through jello instead of air as I pulled out my hidden soda straw and stood up. I spoke slowly and clearly, not because I wanted to, but because it took an effort to move my tongue. "Miss Shripnell, it's not Lorraine's fault," I said. "I shot the spitball." All right, I'm going to end there today and leave you with the thought of what his actions will now mean for the rest of the evening.